Welcome to Talent Buzz, where I talk with SaaS companies on how they are doing their talent acquisition. In today's episode, I'm talking with Antti Poikolainen from Yousician, and we are talking about how Yousician is creating a very good candidate experience for job seekers. And let's kick things off with the fact that why creating a good candidate experience is crucial for a SaaS company.
It's so important and so underrated for a couple of reasons. Well, first of all, I believe the candidate experience, it's really the first impression of a company. And you know what they say about first impressions, they last. So let's take care, since we have the opportunity to manage that first impression. Well, then it's also expectation management for the potential tenure of an employee. So whatever expectations are formed based on that first impression, people want to see those come a reality when they're an employee as well. Well, it's also a chance to have a competitive advantage for hiring. There's a lot of talk about, the talent shortage, developer shortage. Even without such a shortage, we should explore all the avenues we have for beating the competition, getting the right people to join for our mission and supporting that. So candidate experience is one way to do that. And, at the end of the day, it's also, we're dealing with other humans, other people. They have their human rights. There's no reason to treat them badly just because, they might not become our kind of, employee. Let's make sure everyone, regardless of the outcome, has a nice experience, just to be kind. We can always be kind to one another. And there's a little bit of serendipity factor as well. Anything might happen down the road. So let's leave all bridges intact. Very important in the talent acquisition position and the whole field of recruitment.
Yeah, good points. And if I think about kind of my past experience when being part of the kind of recruitment process, I'm kind of personally always checking out, hey, what is good in this process, what isn't good. But personally, I'm not a recruiter, but you are. So I would love to get your kind of feedback and thoughts when you joined Yousician. Like, what was your feeling kind of during the recruitment process? What were the things that you were kind of paying attention to, hey, here they are doing something cool for the candidate experience?
Well, the fact that I had such a good candidate experience was probably one of the biggest selling points for the company. So I think I was most surprised or most enjoyed the kind of personal touch in the recruitment. So my the TA lead, they have a long background in executive search. Doesn't come as a surprise that someone with that background has the ability to handle those recruitments as well. I think it's a simple touch at the end of the day, but having this kind of how was everything, how was the last meeting, any questions that are on your mind between every single interview step was so important to me. Sometimes that would be just an email message after the meeting. On other times it was a kind of almost an ad hoc phone call. And it felt really personal, really caring. But it also helped me better prepare for the next steps and kind of reflect on my experience. It felt really personal. And that was one of the things that kept or even increased my motivation to join the company and give that experience to others as well.
Yeah. I think kind of communication itself, it's a super big thing. And with that one, I think it's still kind of so surprising for me. Like, why just being an open in your communication, making sure you are doing enough communication with that one, you can basically create a good candidate experience, because not that many companies are doing that one. But when we're talking about kind of different stages of candidate experience, I think most of the people are thinking the part where the interviews are happening and all of that. But I think candidate experience starts way earlier than that already, from the first touch point. So we could go through kind of the different stages, but maybe first talk about bit like what is happening kind of before you really kind of arrive to that interview, all the employer branding and how that one is affecting the candidate experience. What are you doing at Yousician on that stage?
Sure. I mean, for me, the candidate experience starts the moment you first time hear from a company, even before you kind of look at their jobs or look at their careers messaging, if you just happen to be a part of the niche or a part of the potential candidate pool that could join the company, well, I think one anecdote or one metaphor we can find is that a lot of times when there's a company who's doing well with their EB, they're known and they're a desirable company to work for. Probably they also have a strong consumer brand. So probably there's a product, and that reputation kind of feeds off and feeds into the employer brand as well. So what we can do is make sure that all the messaging is aligned. So we have a similar kind of offering in the EB side than our product represents. So if you think about Yousician specifically, it's a music education company. So there are values of playfulness, creativity that we want to have in the messaging. But at times there's something that we need to differentiate as well, something that's not so apparent when we are selling the product for you to learn ukulele is that, hey, actually the technology that we have under the hood is really hardcore. Like we have people who've done their PhDs or are doing their PhDs come as an intern to our company, and only then do they have the kind of necessary knowledge to contribute to something very complex like audio recognition and a similar technology. So kind of getting the message aligned, but also making sure the unique strengths we have as a company are present in the EB messaging. And you know, at some point that initial touch point turns into interest, and then we start to actually have the conversation. And I guess we'll go on to your next question and make sure we're proceeding with the agenda as you wish.
Yeah, I think I was just thinking about kind of the common things on kind of candidate experience and customer experience, and thinking kind of what, in a big picture, kind of if you should explain what creates a candidate experience or customer experience. And what I believe in is that a candidate, let's say in this example, they have some kind of idea what the next stage will look like. And kind of if you exceed their expectation, then you typically create a good candidate experience. If they really get something else that they were expecting or something was a bit better. So if we think about, let's say, the kind of the first one-to-one contact with a potential candidate, whether it's a message on LinkedIn or a first interview, I think a lot of candidates have the same expectation, like what is going to happen, for example, on the first interview. So how can you do something differently on that first touch point with a candidate?
It's a great question. Well, I guess, you know, maybe this is a wild answer, but I think, you know, transparency is something you can do better. So I feel like even in a podcast like this, a corporate event, I think people are kind of afraid to spill the beans. They're afraid to really show what's going on, and they start with the most polished image of what they can offer. So really going with that transparency first, you might be able to positively surprise somebody. And you know, I think another one is kind of, you know, if there's a lot of kind of routine stuff you need to inform, maybe you can put that into a written document and really use the conversation time for having an actual conversation, a real dialogue. I think candidates will be surprised if the standard, you know, 30-minute screening call, the first initial touch point, you have maybe 15 minutes or 10 minutes of time for them to ask questions, not just a little, hey, it's the last minute, do you want to ask something? So really kind of give the candidate the ball as well. Yeah, those are some ideas.
Yeah. I've been asking lately for myself, like, how can you make recruitment process scalable, like really, really scalable? And for example, and as you mentioned there, for example, how can you get more out from the, let's say, first 30-minute call? And for example, can you have, let's say, on your career page, kind of a lot of information for the candidates to go through? Or, for example, one question that we've got from a lot of our candidates has been, for example, regarding our finances, kind of being a startup, not having that much capital, like how you are making sure that you can hire people, how you can pay sure that you can pay salaries for them. And I think that comes down to first, like making it scalable and then transparent as well. Because I think kind of the worst thing we could do is be like, hey, like we are a super stable company. No, we are not. Like, I think it's way better to talk openly about those things. And for example, what we've been planning to do is a video around that topic. So we could use that one in our career page, really be transparent and kind of do it in a scalable way that you don't need to have one-to-one discussion with everyone. But the one question that I'm not sure about is kind of where to draw the line between being scalable and kind of having those one-to-one meetings, because I think you still cannot basically automate everything, just put out a lot of content out there, type form questionnaires for the interviews and never never meet the person. So kind of how do you kind of draw the line between there? What parts should be kind of personal for the candidate and what parts you can kind of scale?
Well, it's an interesting question, and I'm very happy you're bringing this innovative mindset into the field. I'm sure we can learn something from your experiences and experiments. I guess the kind of just the balancing equation is, on the one hand, just kind of validation and really, okay, do they meet kind of our minimum criteria, and kind of also maybe go over some hygienic factors like, okay, this is the salary budget, is this something you're okay with? But then on the other side, it's also an opportunity to represent your company and not only dig into their motivation, but also increase their motivation to go through with the pipeline, go through with the recruitment process, and possibly join the company. So I guess the boring answer is, if you're still able to hire your candidates and you have enough interest, you have enough candidates, then you can, so to say, put more barriers and make candidate do more of the work. But it's a difficult balance to strike, and it depends, of course, on the role. So kind of the more senior, probably you have less opportunities, less candidates in the market. So it has to be more personal, more white glove. And if there's more of a pool, then maybe you can have a more automated process.
Yeah, exactly. One big part of kind of creating a good candidate experience is, of course, kind of collecting feedback from the candidates. Like we can discuss here, like, hey, in our opinion, this is a good candidate experience. But if the candidates don't feel that way, then most likely it's not. So can you share a bit more? Like how do you collect candidate feedback at Yousician?
Sure. For us, it's made pretty easy. So we're using a particular applicant tracking system, Greenhouse, and that one sends automated candidate experience surveys to everyone who kind of exits the process. So it doesn't matter if they get rejected or they end up getting hired. Just a couple of days after, they get a bunch of questions about what was their satisfaction, what would they improve, but also what did they like. So that's great. We've also noticed that when do candidates also get the update, they get the news, they usually, if they have something to say, they will also directly reply to those messages. I think all in all, it's very important to kind of encourage the candidate to give feedback or ask questions with all the messages that you do send it out. That I think this is a pretty standard way to end any update email. Hey, if any questions, let me know, and have these done a couple of times. So when push comes to shove, they're also ready to say something, because it's a tender topic for most people. Changing jobs includes a lot of emotions. So when there is a outcome you didn't want, maybe you want to say something as well. And I think this is great for us because we also want to improve and don't want to be just alone in our people HR ivory tower, call the shots from there.
Yeah, exactly. Have you noticed, is it hard to get people to answer? For example, if I think, let's say I'm buying something and then I get this kind of generic message as a text message, like, hey, give some feedback for us. I typically don't give that one unless it's either a super, super good experience or kind of super bad experience. But then, for example, if someone would kind of call me and, hey, ask for my feedback, I would most likely to kind of share that feedback. So kind of, are you as well kind of collecting that feedback kind of during the process, or for example, during the interviews, and kind of making sure that you are getting that one from kind of all the candidates?
I think it's absolutely correct. So if I do ask at the end of an interview, before we end the call, what did you like? Was there something you changed? They're more likely to answer. Same with when they do join the company and they're having their, let's say, onboarding reviews, or just if we just have a casual lunch or some coffee, I do like to meet all the people who join the company as a result, or relating to any processes I've been involved with. Having those conversations, it's easier for them to say it. So yeah, it does speed up collecting feedback.
Yeah. Is it hard to get a kind of good candidate experience if you say no to a candidate? Or is it always like those candidates who have been kind of chosen ones, they always give better feedback than those that you needed to reject for some reason?
Yeah, maybe there is a correlation. I'm not sure. I'd have to check some of our data, but it's kind of, you can still have a good experience even though a candidate is not hired, or you can have a bad candidate experience and still hire the candidate. So both of these outcomes are possible. So you still need to up your game in both situations.
Yeah, I was thinking about that one. We needed to reject one candidate last week. We were kind of recruiting for our own team, and we've used a lot of that person's time for the recruitment process. And we were thinking a lot like, how can you kind of make sure that the kind of feeling that is kind of left after that one is still a good. We kind of knew that we have done the whole process in a good manner, good communication. We were sure that the kind of candidate experience was super good until that point. And then even though you try to do the reject call as good as possible, kind of offer help for that person and all that, I think it's still the hardest thing to do in the recruitment. But
absolutely, I feel the same way, and that's it. When you have to reject a candidate, I feel like their empathy is almost like a double-sided sword. On one hand, you really feel bad about the rejection. You might share their emotions, and you recognize a time when you were in their shoes getting rejected, and there's so many stories on LinkedIn about getting that a rejection template message. Maybe even the name is wrong, and then there's no reason for it, and it just feels so bad. It feels inhumane, and then you're trying to do it for the other person as humanely as possible. So then the empathy can become an kind of advantage when you really try to see it from the other person's side, and then make sure in your process everything is empathetic as possible. Let's say the rejection criteria and the decision making process, are we comparing candidates to each other? Okay, you were good, but this other guy was better. Okay, well, that's maybe not so good experience. But then, okay, we have this hiring bar, so they demonstrate these competencies with these skills, and you kind of didn't reach our hiring bar. So okay, then there's a little bit more objectivity in the field. And then I think even the kind of recruiter's own suffering that comes from the empathy becomes less when you know that, okay, this was a solid decision. I know the criteria. I can agree with that criteria. So you no longer kind of feel bad because it's not the right outcome for not only the business, but it's not right for the person as well. If you determine that according to our best understanding, this won't work out. And that's a tough decision to make, but with good criteria of good decisions and a system you can trust, it reduces some of the pain of rejection as well from both parties.
Exactly. One big part of kind of candidate experience is expectation management. And I think this is important part both in the kind of recruitment process, but then when a person start in the job, like that the place is somewhat what was shared with them, rather than overselling the company, overselling the role. Then someone joins and they are like, this isn't at all what was promised for me. So can you share a bit more kind of how to do expectation management during a recruitment process?
Sure. I think first and foremost is expectation management comes from the innovation that, okay, we can't just be selling, as you said, but we need to be realistic. And people, and then we also understand that people are forming these expectations. It's the mind job to kind of predict the future and try to adjust to it, regardless if we are stating those expectations. And it's a huge decision, a new full-time job, possibly relocation, new country, new city. Maybe you are bringing your family. So it's better to make sure that these expectations are not only realistic, but also aligned with the candidate is looking for. So I would look at a couple of different levels. I would look at the recruitment process. I would look at the role, the kind of team and department, and then the company. And if necessary, let's include the country and city as well. So 5 levels all in all. Well, first and foremost, the recruitment process, it's all about, what are the steps in total? Okay, even during the first call, we would already go through, okay, there will be 5 meetings or 5 action points total. Maybe some companies tend to only share the next step. And then it'll always be a surprise. Okay, how many next steps you are? Okay, we share 5 steps. You'll know how much progress you've made through each part. How long does it typically take? So we can go back to our kind of hiring history. Okay, this process would take 2 weeks. This process would take 4 weeks. And then how can they prepare for each of these conversations? I think it's always a good idea to share who these interviews will be with. Maybe they can do their homework a little bit better. Also, when do I get feedback? If accepted, what happens next? And actually what we do already in the first call, let's say the recruitment process might take 3 weeks, then we can share that the offer phase takes maybe a couple of days, and then the relocation phase takes about 2 months. So even after the first meeting, we can already have a preliminary starting date, which might be, let's say, 3 months down the road for a person who is relocating to Finland. So that is something that has maybe surprised the candidate. Okay, so you've thought it really this far, and that's maybe a good opportunity to show some competitive advantage. Well, then the role, I think most people are really looking forward to what is expected of me. What do I need to deliver, and what kind of timeline? What will I work on? What are the projects going on? Then, of course, the learning and development opportunities. Is there a budget? Is there a time allocation, which many companies are starting to have? How can I get promoted? Stuff like this, all about the role. Then on the team level part, who do I work with? Who is my manager? How do they lead? And other possible stakeholders. Some positions are really very team oriented. In our company, there's a lot of cross-team collaboration. Well, then the company, this is where the kind of usual company strategy, company culture, even the history, ownership values, we like to communicate these. And maybe that's where the usual recruitment expectation management stops. But now we've been increasingly interested in how do people view Finland, and how do people view Helsinki as a place to work. And I've got many questions about, okay, well, I'm moving with my family. What's a good neighborhood to live in? Or what about the taxation at the salary rates that is completely different than mine, for example? So at the end of the day, the recruiters' kind of toolkit when it comes to managing expectations, it can spread almost infinitely far. It's all about, not just the work, but also living conditions and what would it be like to raise a family in Helsinki. So you can go really as far as a person's life can be. But that's something we've been covering here at Yousician.
Good stuff. Good stuff. I've been personally kind of trying to steal as many things from sales to recruitment that's kind of possible. I don't know anything about recruitment. I've recruited like few salesperson, but that's all. But what I've noticed is there is kind of a lot of similarities from sales and marketing to recruitment and employer branding. And for example, the timeline is one thing that I used to do in sales a lot, kind of already on the first discovery call with the customer, kind of go through the timeline, what is expected and all that. And I think it's kind of super nice to use the same framework in recruitment. But one thing that kind of we are kind of testing in Salentpi, would love to hear your thoughts on this one. We've been kind of talking about candidate experience, but still a lot of companies are doing their recruitment process the same way for every candidate. And some candidate might want information on other stuff compared to other candidates. And what we are actually testing right now, I don't know yet if it will be a good idea or bad idea, but after the first intro call, we let the candidate choose the next step. They can either kind of, if they are already ready to go for the task phase, they can be like, hey, let's go for the task phase. Or if they want to meet a team member, they can meet a team member. If they want to talk about our employer branding services, they can meet with our founder Siiri. Or if they want to talk about what kind of customers we are working, we can have a chat about that one. And we are kind of trying out that kind of approach. What do you think on that one? Would something like that work?
I'm sure there's something we can kind of learn from there and apply to our process as well. Just as a comparison point, what we have quite the standard process for all candidates. I think one of the biggest arguments is that we want to be fair and treat all the candidates in a similar fashion and make sure they're being evaluated on the same criteria. And that being said, we might still make changes to the order of the process. So at times we get them to meet the hiring manager first before going to a task or vice versa. Some change that we might do for some roles, we've done this in the past, that, okay, standard way would be to give a take-home assignment, but for some candidates, we change that to a whiteboarding session. So some ability to be flexible, some ability to cater to the candidate's particular needs is definitely a plus. And we know there are preferences. Some work well with people, some like to get that time off for themselves. This is also maybe relating to the topic of DEI and, let's say, neurotypical and non-typical candidates and how they fare in different types of interview situations. So taking that diversity into account is something we have to do in this profession. The kind of general sentiment that you had that, okay, make sure the candidate's preference is heard and applied to the process. Whatever they have on their mind right now should be catered to next. I think is great when it comes to finding the right motivation for them to proceed with the process. So I feel like there's some good idea there.
Yeah, and that actually the kind of comment you mentioned regarding on kind of giving all the candidates the same kind of opportunity, that was something we discuss a lot, and we see that one kind of as one potential risk. Then what we thought was to kind of I would say different reasons why you are doing different things. There is kind of the validation part. For example, in that case, kind of we do the same validation for every candidate. But then, for example, there is kind of the information that candidates need, because for someone, changing a job is a kind of small thing, like, hey, I just need to know about the role and the company. But then there are people who have worked, let's say, for a long time in a company, and they want to know everything about the new place before kind of making the decision. So I would say in our case, we were thinking about kind of that part. So kind of how to give all the necessary information for the candidates who need that one, but then at the same time, like how kind of not to give that information for candidates who doesn't care about that information. But I think it's always a balance between between those. And I think kind of changing a job, for some it's a kind of big thing, for some it's a small thing, but there is always kind of feelings involved. We are people, we have we have feelings. How kind of feelings and candidate experience go hand in hand?
Well, yeah, it's a great topic, and I think maybe if I were to choose, I'm definitely in the kind of category where changing jobs is a big thing for me, and I need to get all the data. So maybe in general, if you think about whether it's buying a house or getting a new job, it's such a complex thing that there's probably no perfect solution. So then you try to get the one that is good enough, and then you want to use all of the available information, and emotions is one of those. So big feelings are a part of the process. And usually, there's a big change, so there are big feelings. Well, I guess, one of the key emotions is just, motivation. So what is driving the change? What is driving the need for something new? And the recruitment process, it can, increase or decrease this sense of motivation. But then one of the biggest obstacles is uncertainty. So you have those questions, you have those unknowns. There's something that's kind of not something that's holding you back, producing some friction. You're afraid to go after something. And actually, when we kind of dig deeper into the source of motivation for any particular candidate, that is usually the key for tackling the uncertainties as well. So for some person, it will be okay if the compensation is better, nothing else really matters. Or for some people, they need to get away from a toxic environment or a toxic stakeholder or something like this. And others just need a fresh start. They want to change industries, they want to change companies, they want to change roles. So whatever is kind of driving their motivation at that particular time, when we understand that, and the earlier we understand that, the better candidate experience will be. And then usually when there is a kind of sense of lack, okay, I'm not getting the growth I need. I'm bored in my daily tasks, or the company is not recognizing my efforts. This already can be a big source of motivation. So sometimes it's a lack, sometimes it's people just want to push themselves, and I think those are the key emotions.
Good points. Good points. But hey, then lastly, story time and learning time. First, what has been kind of candidate experience that you are most proud of kind of creating for a candidate, and what were the kind of learnings from that one that others could steal for creating a better candidate experience?
Sure. Well, I remember a particular case. We had an open developer position we were hiring for, and we had a candidate for it who had already been with a similar recruitment process with our company already 2 times in the past. One time they didn't beat the competition, and another time they had to withdraw from the process due to personal reasons. Well, gladly, both events were handled well enough that they could still consider our company for a 3rd time, which was a great foundation to build upon. So the thanks goes to the previous recruiters and the rest of the team. Well, now it's the 3rd time they're applying. They go through the process, and after completing 4 of the 5 steps, we unfortunately have to know them. Okay, we're actually putting a pause on this process. We cannot finish the hire. So communicating this to a candidate that has already been disappointed by us in the past is a very delicate task. I don't think there's anything that's generally applicable. Every situation, every context is different. Simultaneously, you need to maintain the trust, but also the motivation toward the organization. So it's a very delicate task, while still you need to respect any NDAs and company privacy policies. So they're still a candidate, they're not an employee, so we cannot spill all of the beans. Well, luckily, with some empathy from also their side, they understood the situation and actually stuck around while we worked internally to remove the blocker. And then at some point, we got back into the hiring process, Candidate was luckily still interested. We had the final interview, made the decision, sent the offer, and they were happy to accept it. And I was surprised a couple of days later to be tagged in a LinkedIn post where the candidate was doing the pretty standard gratitude post to their previous employer, excitement about the new one. But they happened to mention the recruiter's name, my name at that point, and gave me a small thank you as well, which was great. There was fantastic to see that also the recruiter's efforts were kind of appreciated. Well, if there's something to learn, well, maybe we already talked about the element of serendipity already, but I think that's important to mention. Even though it's a no at that time, or the candidate has to retreat, or that we have to put a pause for an indefinite amount of time or indefinite amount of time, anything can happen. So I think a recruiter's job is to just go around building bridges and make sure as many of those bridges stay intact as possible. I have so many candidates in my past apply again or share a reference or just give good feedback, even though they didn't get the outcome they wanted or we wanted. Being that bridge builder, being that pioneer, sometimes it hurts to give the bad news, but with the right amount of empathy, it makes our job easier. And anything can happen. You'll never know when a candidate kind of turns into an employee.
Yeah, good story. And then at the same time, kind of what I've noticed in the market is that I feel like in the past, like a lot of companies did their recruitment like kind of one-off project, like, hey, now we need this kind of person, let's recruit that. But now I feel like a lot of companies are starting to look recruitment from a perspective, kind of building talent pipelines. So we know that, hey, next year we will need a lot of technical people. Let's start to build relationship with those people. We don't even need to know the exact role that we will be having, but really build up the pipeline. Kind of similar to sales. Like in sales, you don't wait until the moment, oh no, now we need a new sales. You are doing sales all the time, making sure that you have new customers coming in all the time, and kind of bringing that mindset to recruitment, I think, is something that is happening. But then, lastly, we talk earlier about kind of being real on stuff. So what's the biggest fuck up on candidate experience that you have done?
Yeah, it's feels very vulnerable to share it here online, but yeah, I'm happy to share it. Well, there was a time we were recruiting for a position. We had just one very good candidate in it. They had all the necessary previous experience, and based on the CV, there's no reason they couldn't be hired and succeed on the job. Well, they go through all the process, all the kind of 5 steps we have. But at the end of the day, when we had the final decision, internal meeting, we chose not to hire them. This was a kind of concern that was first raised in interview number 2, and then we kind of further dug into this topic in the later stages. And kind of in the last interview kind of confirmed this concern that we have. Well, when I had the kind of task of communicating the reason to the candidate, we got on a video call and talked that. I failed that task, and the candidate was left in an impression that they already lost the process after the second meeting. So as a result, they thought that, okay, all the 3 interviews after were a waste of time. And obviously they were also very hurt by the decision, and all in all just left a poor taste in their in the after image of the process. And that obviously hurt me as well. It's not how we work. If somebody fails a step, we would let them know immediately and not go into any further steps. But then when you have this feedback, you really need to improve, and you have to understand that even though you make the best effort and you have the good story in your head and you have an idea on how you will communicate it, people see it differently. And I guess in that conversation, I didn't have enough empathy, and I wasn't clear in my communication, even though I prepared for the talk. So that definitely left a mark on me, and I have to step up my game afterwards.
And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you got a lot of good ideas about SaaS talent acquisition. If you enjoyed the episode, feel free to share it on your social so others can hear it too. And if you have a topic in mind that you would like me to cover in this podcast, share it with me as well. I'm Samuli, CEO and co-founder in TalentBee, where we help fast-growing SaaS companies in their talent acquisition. Make sure to follow us, make sure to follow this podcast, and have an awesome week. Bye-bye.